Hey guys, you all know me. I'm Ken Ellison from Ellison Machine Shop. I'm your engine guy. We're going to have a good conversation here this morning. We're going to have a conversation that will be very beneficial to most people. We're going to talk about breaking in a new engine and some tips, tricks, and advice on how to get it started, how to get it rough tuned where it needs to be. We can't go over all the specifics, too many combinations to cover, but we're going to talk about breaking in an engine, getting it up and running. We're specifically going to talk about flat tappet camshafts, hydraulic and solid. They have issues with wiping out sometimes if you don't get the engine up and running right. So we're going to talk about how to do that. And this is also going to help a lot of people because we're going to talk about fuel systems. And this will really help also for you guys that had an engine out of a vehicle or had a vehicle that's just been not being used in a very long time. And I'm going to give you some advice on how to service your fuel system so that you don't wind up with catastrophic engine damage. So even an old vehicle, if you got an old vehicle, an old project that ain't running a while, you'll benefit from this. So before we go any further, I just want to tell you all, this is going to be a fairly long video. And the biggest criticism that I get from you guys, some of you guys, is that I talk too much and I'm a blowhole and I'm long-winded and I like to hear myself and all that kind of stuff. But it's my video, and so if your ADHD is about to kick in because I'm going to drag this on a little bit, now's the time to go take your medication. And my response to everybody who says that I talk too much is tough. This is a talking video. I do not edit these things because this is all free, and it takes a lot of time to do this stuff. So there's not any real editing to it. I get up here, I tell you everything I want to tell you. This is very similar to us having a conversation. You just walking into my shop, and I try to make it a personal conversation. That's why I say I'm your engine guy, because I'm talking directly to you. You hear me bobble when I make mistakes, and on top of that, I take phone calls and comments and emails, and I speak to all my customers, even people that aren't my customers. If you want to talk to me, I'm pretty available. That's why I'm your engine guy. So anyhow, we're going to talk about taking your brand new engine. Now, you would think that we wouldn't have to discuss having new fuel in a brand new engine. People who run dirty gas and garbage fuel systems through brand new engines. You wouldn't think that we would have to talk about not putting dirty, filthy valve covers back on top of an engine that you just spent thousands of dollars to get and have been waiting for a very long time. Now, some of you guys, your project might take days. You might be driving your car, order a new engine, pull one out, put one in, and you're done. But a lot of you guys, you've been doing this for weeks, months, even years. Cars have been sitting, or you've purchased a car that you have no history on it, or it's a chassis that's just, it's been down. But you wouldn't think I'd have to tell you about not allowing crud and dirty gas to go back in your engine. But here we are. And it's really sad how this is our number one problem in this shop, is that people use poor fuel, old fuel. They have a car that's been sitting that's got 1.5 gallons of gasoline in it that's been in there for 1.5 years, and they just dump 15 gallons of new fuel in it. And they say, oh, well, I put 15 gallons of fresh gas in it. So, well, congratulations, you poisoned your engine at about a ratio of 15-1. That's just bad thinking. And as an engine builder, as your engine builder, as I'm an engine builder, we can tell. Your engine builder can tell when you bring that engine back and it's got stuck valves, that it had bad fuel in it. So can I. I call my shop sometimes, I call it CSI Machine Shop. Mechanical things leave trails. We can tell what causes what. If you ever see my video I put out a couple months ago, on a small block Ford that had a white camshaft. It had a white camshaft that a lot of people misunderstood what I was trying to explain in the video. It had a white camshaft because of the bad gas or actually it's debris, but what was happening with the carburetor. A flat tappet camshaft, you got to start them up and get them up to high RPM right away. But on this particular project, when they started it up, they couldn't get it to run right, so it idled and idled and idled and idled while they tuned on it. consequently, they started having problems where valves were sticking. And to make a very, very long story short, I got the whole engine, I brought it back to my shop, I tore it apart, I took the valves out of it, and there was something red in it. And I didn't realize right away that what was in the valve guides, as I'm tearing the whole engine apart and looking in the valve guides, it was rust. Because we use a red assembly lube a lot of times in our motors, and that's what I thought it was. But it was a little bit gritty, and I'm like, this is upsetting. I get the engine all back together, I put it on my run stand, and I fire this up. And it fired right up. It ran good for a moment, and then all of a sudden it started running real bad. Float started bubbling over. I take the carburetor apart. This carburetor had more rust in the one bowl than I've ever seen in any carburetor in my entire career. And the thing is that this customer is a class act. I've been doing business with him for years. He's a grade A guy. I wish I had more like him. They made a simple mistake. They had an old car that was sitting in storage for a long period of time, and the customer brought it in, and I built the whole motor, and I put a new carburetor on it, and it got a new fuel tank, it got a new fuel pump. But you know what? Even pros make mistakes sometimes. What they didn't do is they didn't clean out the line that went from the tank to the carburetor. And I know this thing from sitting. That's the only place the rust could have come from, and if that had been cleaned or replaced, we'd have never had this problem. But the carburetor was full of rust and it wouldn't idle, and it caused the break-in procedure not to happen correctly, wiping the camshaft. So that's the explanation for that for people who says that I don't know what I'm talking about. I did a bad engine. It was very simple. I put it on my run stand. I got it going, and they replaced the line. Never another problem with it. All right, guys, here's the thing. If your engine's been sitting any length of time, you've got to consider the entire fuel system absolutely positively contaminated. From up at the fuel tank, right where the cap is, all the way down the inlet tube to the tank, the steel line, the fuel pump, fuel filters. That engine didn't have a fuel filter on it either. Big mistake. You got to have fuel filters all the time. The fuel line going up to the carburetor, if it's a metal line, that could be full of rust. And the carburetor, all of that stuff has got to be considered contaminated. If you have a project that's been sitting, if your engine's been in a machine shop and it's been in there any length of time, and most of us custom engine builders, we don't flip things in a week. It takes a while to get them back from us. We have a backlog. Sometimes it takes a long time just to get your engine in our shop, let alone get it back from us. But while it's sitting, take care of your fuel system. You know, in most muscle cars, you can drop a fuel tank down and throw it away. And for very little money, you can replace it. They've come way down in price. Now, I know that's not the case on all of them, but you have got to absolutely go through the fuel system from front to back and make sure it's spotless. All right, enough said on that subject. Now, and by the way, that's going to apply to a vehicle that if you have an old vehicle that's been sitting, maybe it hasn't fired up in 2 years. You're going to start it up, you're going to run the bad gas through it, and when the bad gas gets up to it, it's going to clog up the injectors, it's going to stick the valve guides, it's going to mess up the carburetor. Service your fuel system. Same exact scenario. And you wouldn't think I have to talk to somebody about not putting dirty parts back in their engines. But good Lord, I have had guys that I have handed them back a beautiful, spotless, detailed engine. But maybe it didn't have the valve covers on it, or maybe I didn't put the intake and valve covers on it, just did a long block. And I see it later on, and they literally took some filthy, dirty, cruddy valve covers that they stick in a bucket of gas and scrub it with a brush. And you know what happens when I see that, or your engine builder sees that? In his head, even if he don't say nothing, if you had any warranty of any kind, you don't now. You not only do you not have a warranty, we don't even have a lot of compassion for you. At least I don't, because I work too hard to have you go right behind me and mess things up. I have a machine shop. I have cleaning equipment. Guys in your neighborhood have professional cleaning equipment. Your intake, your valve covers, push rod rocker arms if your machinist didn't put them on, timing cover, oil pan, oil pump pickup screen, every single thing the oil touches. Oh, guess what else the oil touches that people forget? Oil goes through oil coolers. A lot of guys never change them oil coolers. They never, if the if the engine went up, especially, it pumped oil in there. Same thing for your transmission. Your transmission goes up, you better clean them oil lines and that oil cooler out, because the guy's going to build your transmission. You're going to put it in. You're going to pump metal right back in his brand new engine or his brand new transmission. My engine, his transmission, and you're going to burn. You're going to burn it up, and you're going to say, "Oh, that guy don't know what he was doing." No, you didn't clean nothing. I have a video out called it was called "Clean Means Clean." I have a gentleman that I was getting ready to hand his engine back to him. He kept the intake, and then he decided to let me put it on. And he brings me an intake. It's clean. He cleaned it. He taped it off. He even had it primered. It was ready to install. He wanted me to put this on. It was ready for it. If he'd have got the engine back, he was going to put it right on. I pulled the tape off of it, and sand's falling out of it. This thing, you have to see the video to believe. This was such a filthy, filthy intake that would have blew this engine up, and he had it ready to install. Now, I go off on everyone about cleanliness, and most people just don't get it. They say, "Oh, I cleaned that," and it's not clean. It just isn't. You think it is, but it isn't. And like I said, we shouldn't have to have conversations about people having bad gas in their engines, or putting filthy parts back on top of brand new, expensive, exotic engine. But yet, here we are. When we start an engine up, I get this conversation all the time. How do I break this in? And I personally have this conversation with all my customers, and sometimes we have it 2, 3, 4 times. I just go over and over and over so they don't make any mistakes. Under some circumstances, it'd be quicker for me to go out there and fire up their engine for them than it would be to sit here and talk them through it. But nevertheless, this is what I tell my customers when they're ready to start up a new engine. Now, what I'm getting ready to tell you does not override what your machinist says. I am not the guy who built your engine. I don't know all the specifics behind your engine. Excuse me. I do not know all the specifics behind your engine. Your machinist does. So whatever he tells you is law. If I'm telling you something that sounds like it makes a lot of sense, and it's different than what he's telling you, you might want to have a conversation with him. But do not take my advice over the guy who built your engine until you discuss that with him. He's got your warranty. I don't. So here's what we do. We get an engine. We get the engine in the vehicle. At this point, we're going to assume your engine's in your chassis. The fuel system is perfect. You've taken your valve covers and all those parts. You've had them professionally cleaned. The motor is ready to fire. So what I do first is that we fill the radiator full of coolant. Now, a lot of guys don't want to use an antifreeze. Some guys are race engines and they don't like to run oily type coolant in race cars, especially drag racing, because if you lose it, it can oil the track down. What you can do in that part, a lot of guys will run a distilled water. But while you're breaking an engine in, it really isn't that big a deal. And especially if it's a street car, you got to have coolant in it, or at the very least, a water pump lubricant and rust inhibitor. That'll help keeping that brand new block that is spotless on the inside from starting to rust on you. So keep your radiator cap off. Fill the radiator full of coolant. I go through, I squeeze all my radiator hoses, bypass hose, heater core lines, air bubbles will come out of the system. It'll go down a little bit, top it off. So what we're going to do, though, is we're going to start it up with the cap off. And as the engine gets hot, the thermostat's going to open, it's going to drop down. We're going to top it off. And then as the engine gets even hotter, then the radiator level is going to expand. It's going to get hot and come up, and it's going to start to bubble over. Cap it off at that point. We just want to make sure we got all the air bubbles out of it. That's another cool story we're going to have later on. Before you fire this engine up, I want you to get ready to set the timing. Now, once again, this video doesn't cover every single engine out there. We're talking about engines that have distributors, flat tapping camshaft, your basic American muscle car engine. Exotic cars, you might be doing things different. And once again, let me reiterate, listen to your builder, not me on everything. Set your timing light up. Get your timing tools ready. Have your timing light set up, have it connected, have your distributor wrench there, have the marks on your balancer clearly marked. Sometimes you're outside in an area where the sun's real bright, you might not be able to see, so you got to be able to do this where there's enough shade, or have somebody hold a piece of cardboard over you or something to where you can see to set the timing. So think this through a little bit. Be a chess player. Think a few plays in advance, a few steps in advance. Be ready to fire this up and immediately set the timing. But what we're going to do first, right before we set the timing, I should say, as soon as this fires up, we want to check the oil pressure. Now, oil pressure shouldn't be an issue because the engine should have already been primed with a oil pressure gauge on it, and it should have been primed long enough for all of your lifters to push oil through them. But where you can see it coming down your rocker arms. So go ahead and fire it up. This should have already been primed. Fire it up. Once you fire it up, immediately, either if you have somebody inside the vehicle watching the gauge, or I like to have a gauge underneath the hood because most of the time I do things like this, I'm doing it by myself. Make sure if you're using an inside gauge that it's a good gauge, something that you positively can trust. A manual gauge is very inexpensive. You can get one and you can actually screw it right on the engine. So you start this thing up, you make sure it's got oil pressure within seconds. Once you've checked the oil pressure, look for leaks. Drop down your hands and knees, look all around. Make sure we're not losing antifreeze or gasoline or transmission fluid, power steering fluid, anything that could actually cause a fire or blow the motor up or cause issues of any kind. So check the oil pressure, immediately check for leaks. That can be done in 60 seconds. And you fire it up, you can goose it a little, keep the throttle going, rev it up a little bit. When you rev an engine, it gets the lifter spinning. And that's what breaking in a hydraulic cam is going to do. It's going to get the lifter spinning. As the lifter spins, it breaks in. When a lifter is stuck and it doesn't move, it'll start wearing out. So by hitting the throttle a little bit and getting it up to high RPM, will get your lifter spinning. As soon as you know your pressure is good and there's no leaks, you immediately get the timing set. And you need to know going into it somewhere where the ignition time is supposed to be. You can find that out from your builder. And I'm going to tell you, generally speaking, that most engines are somewhere between the 12 to 20 degrees at idle, and full advance is going to be somewhere in probably right around 30ish, maybe a little higher, maybe a little under. But if you don't know the difference between initial timing and full advance timing, then you're not ready to proceed with this project. And you will either need to get yourself someone who's a professional to help you, or at least has a lot more experience. If you set the timing incorrectly, you can melt the pistons out of this motor before you get the thing tuned up. Before you ever get a chance to put a hood on it and take it for a ride, you can melt the pistons out of this motor. When you take it back to your builder, he can look at the pistons, he can look at the valves, the combustion chamber, and says, this thing was detonating. This is a tune-up issue. This isn't my fault. And believe me, the CSI machine shop, the clues are there. It's conclusive. So you have to know how to set your timing. So what you're going to do is that you're immediately going to get your timing set, and then you're going to get this thing up, and you can turn the idle screw in and get this thing up to running at about 2,500 RPMs. Now, I let this thing run, and I let it run for about 25 minutes or so. Now, the oil, once again, you need to know what kind of oil you got in it. But for a flat tappet camshaft, you have to use an old style oil, something that is either, our oil years ago was high with zinc and phosphorus. It's what we call ZDDP. And if you're running regular oil nowadays, you have to put an additive in it, a ZDDP additive. You can get it from Urson, you can get it from Lucas, STP. There's lots of it out there, lots of brands. But it has to go in the engine when you're breaking in. Either that, or you have to use older oil that they call older style oil, or oil that they call either break-in oil or hot rod oil. You have to make sure it says right on it high ZDDP. So I let the engine run for about 25 minutes or so, and then I shut it off. And I just want you to know that if you're in the middle of something and something doesn't go right and you have to shut this thing down, it doesn't destroy the break-in process. If you have to shut it off, shut it off. You start it back up and you'll run it. We'll get it broke in. Sometimes you have to shut them off 4 or 5 times. I've started them up, had them running, have a bolt start leaking on the carburetor, have to shut it off, fix the bolt. It doesn't hurt nothing. But here's one of my little tips that I do. When I'm building an engine, I go through and I take a whiteout marker. And it's a white ink, and I go through and I put a line on my push rod. I put a white line on the top of the push rod that goes up underneath the rocker arms. I do that on all of my push rods. And the reason I do that is because the way we know our lifters are spinning is to watch our push rod going around in circles. So after I've had it running for about 25 minutes, I'll start it up. And if I have to tune on it just a hair, adjust the carburetor a little bit while it idles, that doesn't scare me. Never had an issue doing that. But I don't do it for long. I mean, I can do that in a minute or two. Then what I'm doing though, I will pull one valve cover, and I will run this, and I'll make sure that these are spinning. Then I'll take the other, I'll put that valve cover on. I'll take the other valve cover off, and I'll make sure that they're spinning. Sometimes, if they're not spinning, it can be as little as something as improper valve adjustment. Backing off on them sometimes we'll get it right. But that's something you have to make sure. If the push rods aren't spinning, it looks like you're going to lose a camshaft. So, once again, I'm only running this thing. It only took a minute to watch both sides and then shut it back off and button it up. I fire this thing back up a second time after I put the valve covers on, and I'm going to let this thing run a half hour, maybe 40 minutes, watching my temperature, watching it, making sure that she doesn't heat up. Watch my temperature continuously, watch my oil pressure continuously, and I tell everybody, if all of a sudden you think something isn't exactly right, if that little voice inside your head is telling you that something ain't right, listen to that little voice. That guy's a smart guy. And most of the time when somebody brings something in and it's had issues, they say, I knew this was wrong, or I knew that wasn't right, but they ran it anyway until it gets worse. So don't be scared to shut it off and ask for help. But I let my engine run. I'll break in an engine anywhere from about 40 minutes to an hour. And then what I do is I drain the oil out of it. I drain the oil into a clean pan, and your oil's always going to look like brown metallic paint. Don't let that scare you. You're going to see glitter in it, especially if you're outside doing it in the bright sunlight. It might freak you out if you've never done it before. But then you drain the oil out real slow. When you get to the bottom, if you don't have anything much in there, it's not a big deal. If you got a whole handful of copper brass looking particles that you can literally pick it up and bring it in and show me or show your builder, you probably have an issue. You can even actually take the oil filter off and cut it open. You got to be careful not to get the metal in the filter as you're cutting it open. But you can cut a filter open and open up all the filter element and look in between the fins and see if it's full of garbage. I do that after it's been running for an hour. I change the oil and filter. I put clean oil and filter back in it with another quart of the ZDP additive. And I change my oil and filter every 500 miles for the first 2,000 miles. Now, that's a little excessive. A lot of people say so. But if you get up to the 1,000-mile mark or the 1,500-mile mark and you're changing the oil and you drain it out and you got a bunch of garbage inside your engine, you just save from maybe throwing a rod through the side of that engine or maybe ruin your vacation if you're taking your car away on vacation. So I do that. I figure by the time I've got 2,000 miles on it, if it's if you're talking street ride anyway, not race car, but if it's got 2,000 miles on it, then I feel real comfortable to take that car anywhere I want to go. And some people say, well, I don't put 2,000 miles a year on my car. Well, you need to drive your car. It's part of the braking procedure. But checking your oil like that, I just think it's cheap insurance. And it's, you got a lot of time and money invested in this thing, and you can't penny pinch every buck along the way. It's cheap insurance to make sure that thing breaks in properly. And most of the time, if you're going to have any type of bearing issues, you're going to have it within the first 2,000 miles. I think that's very, very important. One of the other things that I do, this is another really good, inexpensive tip that you can use. You can pick up an infrared gun. An infrared gun looks like a timing light. You squeeze the trigger and it has a little red beam come out, just like the little laser pointer that you use to to drive the cat crazy. You got the infrared gun, and you can aim it, and it'll put a red dot, and it'll tell you how hot things are just but one contact. I run my engines, and when I get them started, I go through and I take my gun and I shoot it on all of my header tubes. Now, header tubes are going to vary, and I'm not going to try to tell you what temperatures they're supposed to be because there's too many. It's too long of a conversation, but they will vary from cylinder to cylinder. Ideally, you want to have something that they're all running the same. That's fantastic. A lot of times that's got to do with the header. This header flows nice and easy, and this one's got a bend on it. Well, this one backs up the heat, so forth. Now, I go through and I check it with an infrared gun. If I've got 400 degrees, 400 degrees, 400 degrees, 120, something wrong in the cylinder. This cylinder ain't even hardly firing. And then you can figure out what's what. It's just a really good diagnostic tool. Like if you have an engine missing, go around, hit all your headers. So hit every single tube. If you got a cylinder that's cold, there's your miss. Just find out what's associated with that cylinder. Another quick tip, I hear this all the time, guys will have headers that are glowing. And they'll say, and you can read it on forums, thousands and thousands of people on forums saying, your timing's too far advanced. Well, that's not true. If your headers are heating up and they're starting to get red, then you have your timing retarded. And what's happening is your cylinder is firing late, and when it's firing late, the exhaust valve is opening, and the fuel charge is going into the exhaust system, and it's burning on its way out. The combustion process has to happen in the combustion chamber, not in the exhaust. So if you got headers that are glowing, advance your timing. That's a very common mistake. Now, every single thing here that I've talked to you about is pretty basic knowledge. I've used a few terms that maybe you haven't heard before, like initial timing. A lot of guys don't know exactly what that is. These things you have to research. You can't just get an engine and think you can put it in and start it up. I have guys that bring engines back to me once in a while, and they've done bad things. I'll tell you a real quick story. I tell every single one of my customers, you don't have a friend, you don't know anybody that knows how to set the timing by ear, and it's okay. The things that I'm telling you have to be done. I tell everyone, if you set the timing incorrectly, you're going to hurt this motor. I had a customer call me up, told me an engine that I was running over here on a run stand won't start. I went over and looked at it. He had a bad ignition. While I'm there, he's trying to fire this up. He don't even have a water pump on it. And I said to him, so why are you trying to start it? He says, well, I got to get a special fan adapter for it. I ain't got it yet. I said, why are you trying to start it? He said, well, I just wanted to hear it to kick off. I said, okay, so you just want to kick it off with no water in it. I don't have time to go into how ridiculous that is. Okay? So I find out it's bad ignition. He gets it. He gets the water on it, the water pump on it. He brings this really cool vehicle over to my shop to show all my guys. I greatly appreciate that. I asked him the same thing I asked all my customers. What you got your timing set at? He said, I don't have it set at yet. So, at this point, I've done lectured him on how to do this. He listened to nothing I had to say. When he pulled off the lot, I thanked him. We shook hands. And I told all my guys, I said, his warranty is instantly void. I said he didn't listen to nothing I said. What I tell you when you pick an engine up from me is not up for debate. If you don't do it the way I tell you, don't ask me to have your back. It's just, something happens, you're in trouble. So anyhow, that's the end of this one. That's a long video, like I said. And just want to say I appreciate all you guys. And I just want to, one more time, probably for the third or fourth time, say, trust your builder. If you don't trust your builder, you shouldn't have went to him to start with. That's the truth. So, but you need to trust your builder. You need to listen to him. If you have problems, don't take it apart. Do not take it apart without talking to your builder. You can't go buy a refrigerator, and when the refrigerator doesn't get cold to your satisfaction, just take it apart and go back and tell them, oh, it's defective. Here, look at this. You have to have authorization to take apart what I put together. If you take it apart, remember the CSI machine shop thing? You're messing with the clues. Don't take it apart. If you take it apart, you'll pay me a second time. So it's real simple. I'm a real easygoing guy. Just talk to me. We'll get through it together. Your machinist is probably the same way. If you have a problem, talk to him. Try to get through it together. Be civil to him. He'll be civil to you. Thanks a lot, guys. It's been fun.